Welcome to a special breaking news edition of the FITSNews Week in Review. We are on location at the Bristol here in historic Charleston, South Carolina, on the banks of the Ashley River. So much happening this week. We had to do a breaking edition and get this episode up as quickly as possible just because the news flowing at a torrential pace here nationally and in the Palmetto State. We've got a special guest this week, folks, Lauren Taylor, our legal expert. We're going to talk with her about the developments in the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga, specifically that big appeal pushed by Alec Murdaugh's attorneys. We're going to walk you through why that matters, not only for the Murdaugh case, but for cases all across the country. Lauren and I also talk about Micah Miller and the issue of coercive control. We get in depth about what folks in Micah's position should do, how they could take action and steps to protect themselves against the kind of abuse that Mica endured. We're also going to walk through the potential for legislation, which could expand South Carolina's domestic violence statutes to incorporate new definitions of coercive control. Lauren and I are also going to talk about the latest developments in what has become an absolutely unprecedented presidential race. And Dylan Nolan and I are going to sit down to talk about what that means for the future trajectory of this race. Trajectories that this past week included actual bullets aimed at one of the two candidates. We're going to walk you through what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. We're going to walk you through the fallout from that, Trump's vice presidential selection, and all of the implications as we head toward an unprecedented November 2024 election. All of that and more coming your way on a very special breaking edition of the Week in Review. All right, so we're here with Lauren Taylor. Lauren, you provided such insightful, impartial, just down the middle factual analysis back during the big Murdaugh hearing back in January, but I gotta hand it to you. You called it. Not only what was gonna happen, but the timing of what was gonna happen. 6 months after this hearing, we have now received news, some developments on Alec Murdaugh's appeal, specifically a motion by his attorneys to have his case certified before the Supreme Court. What exactly does that mean? Walk us through this process for those who aren't familiar.
So thank you, Will. Happy to be here again. I had somebody message me on Instagram and say that I was like right to the date, 6 months. And I was like, man, I didn't know it was that dead on. I might have gotten my initial prediction about Judge Stoll's ruling incorrect, but at least I was on track with the appeal schedule. So essentially, to answer your question, what that means is it's leapfrogging over the Court of Appeals, which would typically be the next level when you're appealing the case. So this is appropriate in situations when there's a high level of public interest.
Check that box.
Yeah, exactly. And Dick and Jim's real main argument here is that, first of all, there's really no case law in the entire country that gets exactly to the point where we're at the level of, interference that Ms. Hill had in this trial. So it's a novel issue. It's one that involves a state employee, and whether or not, her contact with these jurors was harmless or not. They all testified that they had interactions with her, and then the ones that I think it was Juror Z that actually said, yeah, I did hear that, and it did have an effect on me rendering of my verdict, or the rendering of my verdict.
Well, shouldn't that have been it? Well, because you and I, we were both in the courtroom. We heard that. It's like, well, game over. Let's go home, right?
Yeah, I think all of our jaws collectively dropped, and we were like, that's the money shot, because keep in mind, this was, Judge Toll laid out very specific parameters for that hearing in the fact that the prosecution and the defense could submit the questions they wanted the jurors asked, but she was conducting the questioning of these witnesses. It was not going to be, a standard cross-examination and direct examination. She was going to be in charge of that ship. So with those questions, going back and forth between the sides, and we get to the question she's agreed to ask, and then when one of those questions
very narrow too, yeah,
those questions results in an answer that, in the framework she laid out, that affirmative answer should have, collapsed the rest of the house of cards. And she, then she also changed her ruling to allow, I believe, Rhonda Galvin to come in as a contradictory witness to Ms. Hill's testimony. So now she's taking in the encompassment of everyone's testimony, and she did say in her order she did not find Ms. Hill to be a credible witness. Mm-hmm. However, she does not believe that the way she's going to apply the case, that the standard has been met. Mm-hmm. Now we're into a whole new ballpark of issues, right? And I think this is what frustrates people, because the guilt or innocence of Mr. Murdaugh is not what's being debated here. We're really into a procedural issue and a procedural court where there's Supreme Court, there's federal issues. South Carolina does fall under the Fourth Circuit. Which typically means if there's a federal case in the Fourth Circuit and a court rules that way, we being in the Fourth Circuit would follow along under those guidelines. Now, that's not always the case, but that's typically how it goes. So with the cases in contention here, Remmer being a U.S. Supreme Court case and Green being a case that is a South Carolina case, we're having some butting of heads of state law and federal law and how that's going to happen. So what Dick and Jim are really asking for is not only to leapfrog over the Court of Appeals and have the Supreme Court hear it, but to leapfrog again from the state level of Supreme Court to actually the U.S. Supreme Court. His argument, which honestly, I agree, it's very difficult to ask state judges to rule on federal issues. So he wants to say, okay, we need to decide, is Remmer the law of the land or is it not? It's a very old U.S. Supreme Court case, and it's been applied very differently across the country. So his argument is, look, this isn't even proper to be heard in the South Carolina Supreme Court. It needs to go, Alan Wilson, our Attorney General, needs to take this over and take it up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
He needs to argue it in D.C.
And if that happens, we will never stop saying the name Murdaugh.
Well, and let me ask you, because it is difficult. We've got this, obviously a defendant who was reprehensible on a very elemental level. Let's assume, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt that there is questions regarding the integrity of this verdict, which I think there are. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that, there's things that emerged during the trial that would lead some to believe, well, he's lying to cover up what he really knows about what happened. But forgetting all of that, setting aside the murder verdicts, this is a guy, all the things he's already been sentenced for, that he confessed to doing, just a horrible guy. So it's difficult to be in the position where we're like, well, wait a minute. Yes, he's a horrible guy, but this process, there's some questions about it, aren't there?
I think the frustration amongst citizens of South Carolina is the waste of resources, or what they might deem to be a waste of resources. And, not to get a little in the dirty area here, but a lot of people want to know how Dick and Jim are continuing to fund this litigation, especially when there's a lot of victims who haven't been made whole, and there's a lot of lawsuits as far as Mallory Beach's family. There's a lot of people in line to collect what is rightfully theirs. So there's a lot of questions with that, and it's a lot of why are we wasting government resources going through all of this? He's a bad guy. He's pled guilty.
It's where he belongs.
He's in jail. Let's just throw away the key and forget about it. And I think that the reason that these laws exist and precedent exists, although we've seen a lot of precedent go by the wayside in the recent months, but I think the reason it exists is because when we have something like this that has never happened before and it's bad, okay, I think we can all agree, regardless of what Ms. Hill did or didn't say, and regardless of what effect it may or may not have had on the verdict rendered at the end of the day, that is a bad actor, and we cannot have people, it's more of a waste of state resources to have someone in a state position teetering and messing with a trial that is costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars to do once, hopefully, and secure a conviction. So the misuse of funds is rampant in all the areas, but I think it's important that we get the precedent on the books. That way this never happens again. And if it does happen, we know exactly what the procedure is. We go back and we start over. I do think with the Supreme Court now, it's a different court than when Justice Toll was on it. It's a different court.
What are some of the differences between the court that will hear this new motion, and the court that's been managing the Murdaugh process all along?
Well, the most notable difference is we now have the Honorable Letitia Verdon on our Supreme Court, which I think is just a great win for South Carolina. And, the politics of the justices, they're people, they have their own opinions, they have their own histories that have led them into these seats. Letitia, for example, was a prosecutor and then a family court judge. Some come from private practice, and some come from the defense bar. So you're looking at a wide array of experiences and knowledge that's going into reading case law and assessing what is applicable here. But you've also got the fact that no judge ever wants to be overturned, okay? They don't want to be mentioned. They don't want their rulings to be struck. So the Supreme Court here is in a very uncomfortable situation where this is our state, it's our mess, okay? And it's a mess. We now, I think we can agree that Dick and Jim have made the right to jump over the Court of Appeals and get to the South Carolina Supreme Court because of the intense public interest. I mean, this has been, what, 3 years
Well, and as you mentioned, the novelty of the issue too. That's the other prong.
Exactly, and the novelty of the issue. So I think they don't want to rule wrong. They're going to be this decision is going to decide whether we apply Rimmer in the state of South Carolina, and whether it's an every time thing or a sometime thing, and what standard and what burden is going to be put on the government versus.
But could it even be bigger than that? Could this be the case that ultimately gets kicked up to the Supreme Court to determine how Rimmer's going to be applied all across the country?
It absolutely could. I mean, Rimmer is almost 100 years old.
Wow.
So we've just got a new world now. And if that happens, law scholars will be referring to it as the Murdaugh.
Wow.
Murdaugh case.
Then we really won't be done with saying the name. But
Exactly.
Lauren, let me ask you this thing. As you followed this case, you were tracking the arguments during the hearing. You've been tracking the filings since. Where do you see this going from here? Do you think the court will grant this motion for certification? And if so, what kind of deliberations are they going to engage in at that point?
It's such a hard thing to get in the heads of these jurists and see, what exactly is going to come down to being the pinnacle issue for them. I think undoubtedly Ms. Hill's testimony, even in that closed circuit of Justice Toll questioning her, I think that record is going to be what they go back to over and over again. Like when she was in that seat and when a former Chief Justice is questioning her, she continued to lie. Yeah. So at that point, and even that justice said in her order, she was not found credible. So I can see that side of it, but I can also be very honest and see them wanting to kick this up and say, look, we need more guidance here. We are not, we're not a federal court. If this is a federal court law, then we need some guidance from the Fourth Circuit. And unfortunately, we haven't had a situation arise to this level in almost 100 years. So maybe it is time for them to look at this, and maybe this is the case that they do it in, because like I said, it's never happened before, and God willing, it won't happen again. But the facts of this one are, egregious. From what started as we think, thinking Dick and Jim were just crying and whining about some stuff, it really did come to fruition that there were major issues here.
I think the integrity of the verdict is very much in doubt.
I would agree.
And that's unfortunate because, again, this was a case South Carolina really needed to get right, Lauren.
And I think they did. I think every prosecutor got it right. I think every person that played a part in it got it right. It was just who was there untangling that knot, every time they were trying to, and that's what's so difficult. And that's what everyone, if I'm Judge Burden and I come from a prosecutorial background, I know how long Creighton Waters prepared for that trial. And I know what his life was like during that 6 weeks, and, time with family, time with friends. Like, it is all encompassing of your life, and not just you, but everybody on your team, your entire office, the national pressure, the media pressure.
And he did an amazing job.
He did an amazing, and he secured a verdict. That was what his goal was. So to have all
which is,
undone,
we believe, the right verdict.
I agree. Yeah, but to have it all undone though by someone who really your only job is to guide the procedural steps.
Take lunch orders. Yeah, take the lunch orders.
Guide them to the restroom and back into the jury room and make sure that media doesn't, try to grab them or talk to them. So for all of that hard work and funds and public funds and all of that to just be undone by someone who really was just an ornament on this Christmas tree it's infuriating. But it is a chance for us to, go back and correct an issue that did arise. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't do that.
Well, Justice Verdon, a lot of these justices, where do you think their head's going to be? I mean, do they want to be the court that gives Alec Murdaugh a new trial? Is that the sort of publicity they want? Or
I don't think anyone wants that. But, the court and the justices that it's made up are very, very much going to be using their integrity to rule on this. And what they might decide personally is right for South Carolina, they might still have a procedural argument to say, look, we really do need the federal courts to come in and make this more of a Fourth Circuit binding issue, or to make it the law of the land. And so we'll see, I guess, how that happens. But I'm hoping that we get a new trial. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Justice Verne. I mean, she does have a reputation of following the law wherever it leads. So in this case, a lot of folks are arguing that it should lead to a new trial.
That's there's two roads, two arguments. It's just which path are you going to jump on? And the logic is thorough on both ends of the path. It makes sense not to make the government have to constantly have burdens and challenges to jury verdicts and have to call jurors back in, and the civil servant side of that. But when justice requires it, that's what we have to do.
Well, from the beginning of this case, Lauren, you have dove into a pool of sharks. This case is, I'll tell you, people from all angles, just very passionate, very opinionated, very factional. But you have done an amazing job of just breaking it down for us based on the law, based on the facts. Thank you again. And so your crystal ball from 6 months ago, you got a crystal ball for 6 months from now? Is this case?
I think it gets kicked.
Oh, wow.
I think it might get kicked, yeah. If I had to say so right now.
We'll come back in 6 months. We'll find out. Lauren Taylor, thank you again.
Of course, thanks a lot.
So when this news outlet exclusively reported in early May on the suspicious suicide of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina pastor's wife, Micah Miller, we had no idea that this story was going to explode all over the national consciousness to become, again, one of the most compelling true crime dramas South Carolina has seen in many years. And again, this is the state, folks, that's produced the Murdaugh murders saga. But this is a story, a mystery, a suspicious suicide. It's attracted all sorts of conspiracy theories, all sorts of questions. It's produced all manner of legal filings. But today we're going to talk about an element of this case that hasn't been discussed as much. There's a policy component to this story now, and I'm joined by Lauren Taylor as we talk about the element of the Micah Miller saga that is starting to really dominate discussion. It's this notion of coercive control, of should South Carolina and other states for that matter look at their domestic violence statutes and rethink the way that they're structured, the way they're enforced. You deal with a ton of family law, Lauren. We thought you'd be the perfect person to bring in and talk about this. First of all, let's start with the basics on the Micah Miller story. There's been so much alleged abuse, harassment, stalking, manipulation, isolating her from family members, all under the guise of spiritual authority. I mean, this guy's a pastor, using that term loosely. But Lauren, let's just get your baseline thoughts on the Micah Miller case from what you've seen so far.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think it's one of the saddest displays of what I see on a daily basis played out really on an escalated level. And I think that's what has really grabbed the attention of the national media on this case too. It's so tragic. She was so beautiful. She did try so many things to leave her situation. So just as an overall, what is coercive control? So this is a theory or a thought of mind, basically where someone doesn't necessarily hit you or abuse you physically. They have a coercive control over your life, which leads to the same consequences. So they might not allow you to go to the grocery store or monitor your phone calls, really isolate you from your friends and family. Really, coercive control is chipping away at every little part of you that makes you, an independent person, and putting all that down to where you can't function as a human without this abuser. You need them to live, right? So in our state, while we do still have the right to do what's called a no-fault divorce, we also have fault-based grounds. And one of the fault-based grounds in South Carolina is physical cruelty. A lot of clients come to me that are in Micah's situation where, at least so far with what the family has put out there, I don't think that the abuse escalated to physical. At least not habitually. So we don't have kind of a little cutout in South Carolina right now that covers emotional abuse, which is really where coercive control would fall under. And, sometimes that is so frustrating because you don't ever want to look at a client that's coming to you. If Micah Miller was sitting in my office telling me what she was experiencing with her husband, I don't ever want to have to say, well, we have to wait for him to hit you before we can do anything. So I think that is what is arising out of this and Micah's law that I believe Regina Ward is working to try to get passed. I know that South Carolina we're 6th in the country for domestic violence. We have a huge problem with that in our state. Now, while we do have some laws on the books that, regulate if you've been convicted of a domestic violence offense, your right to own a firearm is suspended for, I believe, 2 years. It's not enough. And I think that's what we're seeing here is the side of things. In today's society, it's a lot easier to control someone and to manipulate the situation. And if they don't have a bruise on their arm or they don't have a black eye, it's harder to get anyone else to believe you. And not just believe you, but it's harder to get proof. And when we're in the realm of family court, they have to sift through so many things to try to figure out what is the truth of the matter here. And unfortunately, whether lawyers are advising people of this or whether it's just the nature of who we are as a society, the worst actors can use family court to further that abuse. They can actually continue the abusive process with the help of family court.
Through the system.
Through the system, if they play it, accurately. For example, Mr. Miller, I believe it's alleged by Micah's family that he had her involuntarily committed. That is a terrifying situation, and I'm certainly not speaking about it to give anyone any ideas, but in this state, if you are married to someone or a family member and you feel as though that person is a direct threat to themselves or others, you can call the Department of Mental Health and they will be picked up for a 72-hour hold. During that time, they're mentally evaluated and they're trying to determine if they're fit to re-enter society. During that 72 hours, they might decide, hey, you are nuttier than peanut butter jar. We've got to get you some serious help here. Or they could decide you don't have anything that's wrong with you. In most cases, when situations like Mica has happened, there are a lot of things going on that might not make you super happy. You might be going through anxiety, depression. I mean, leaving an abusive situation, it takes the average woman 7 times before she actually can successfully leave that scenario. So yeah, our mental health state isn't going to be great in that scenario anyways. And for someone to capitalize on that by having her hospitalized, which I'm sure is in and of itself a traumatic experience to be put in a police car and taken to a mental health hospital where you can't leave for 3 days. That's him using the system to further his abuse and his coercive control. And then while she was in the facility, disposing of her vehicle and all of that stuff. So there's a need to...
Well, and worse than that, allegedly seizing a lot of the evidence that she had collected against him to sort of...
Her diaries and things like that. And that's the problem when... And I have to sit every day across from women that come with similar stories. And, I give them all the same advice. Keep a book of every single thing that happens. Every time there's a nasty text message or a nasty email or, a threatening act, just document it, because your brain is so overwhelmed at that time and you're thinking about self-preservation, you're thinking about protecting your children, you're terrified about your financial state, you're terrified over whatever this person is telling you, which is probably not truths or things designed to further scare you into not leaving the situation. So when we talk about having legislation fill that gap, I think it's something that's important. But on the other side of it, we have to look at enforceability. And also, the family court is a court that is congested. They're dealing with child protective service cases. They're dealing with DSS cases. They're dealing with juvenile, criminal cases. So when we enact a law that would make it illegal for someone to stalk someone or have financial control over their bank accounts or isolate them from their friends and family, I can see the need from that just from my own experience with these women. But I can also see on the flip side of that how an abuser could use that law to help themselves or use that. I half the time whenever I get someone who has been abused, there's at least one police report where the abuser said that the victim hit them. Wow. And once you've gotten in the mud there, now everybody's, guilty here. And the family court judge, who doesn't know you and doesn't know your spouse or the father of your child or the mother of your child. There's women that are doing this to men as well. This is not, an only female crime. When you're asking someone like that to make decisions that have an impact on your family forever, it's scary. And it's scary to try to legislate something like that. But without legislation, we won't have a way to enforce it. So far, I know that Canada, UK, and Australia have laws on the books regarding coercive control. In the US, I believe it's Hawaii and California that have some semblance of that, which interestingly enough, when I was reading up on this, Hawaii has actually seen, I believe, a 15% decrease in their domestic violence rates since they've put this law on the books. So there's, research to indicate that this will have a reduction in the amount of domestic violence instances that you have in a state that passes it. But just like everything else, you can't just pass a bill and think that's going to solve the issue here. How do we enforce the law? How do we simplify the court system to where now we're not just sitting here having motions over, did he follow me home from school? Or he, is stalking me because he picked the kids up at daycare at the same time I did. There's going to be a lot of frivolous things that are filed that you have to sift through to find the actual real victims of the coercive control.
Well, let me ask you this. I wanted to, obviously Micah's case is an outlier, certainly in the outcome and the depth of alleged depravity on the part of John Paul Miller. I mean, you read what the families put out, you read some of these family court filings that have been submitted, one by his former wife, alleging all manner of sexual abuse, some involving underage victims. I mean, it is just some horrific stuff, and just what the family has released about the alleged harassment and intimidation and isolation of Mica. But the tactics, whether shutting off finances, whether the trackers, the PIs, the taking of the private images and videos and threatening to release them, that's not an outlier. That stuff happens all the time, right?
It does. And we do have laws on the books, for revenge porn. And, financial abuse it's not a carved out fault-based ground for divorce in South Carolina, but it is something that family court judges will look at as a factor when, we're trying to say, okay, we need someone to leave the house. Because in this state, in order to file, unless you have a fault-based ground, someone has to leave before we can file for divorce. So if we're saying we're scared for her to leave because he controls all of the finances and she doesn't have anywhere to go, there's so many layers to this. So we do have laws on the books to protect from some of this stuff, but we can't catch up. If somebody wants to really wreak havoc on their spouse's life, like allegedly Mr. Miller did to Mica, the court system they're still trying to tie their shoelaces, after the gun went off. So I think it's a problem with bureaucracy, and we can't just write a law. We have to write a law that's actually enforceable and people understand how it's enforceable and how is it going to be practically applied when it actually is in front of judges and they're asked to look at facts and determine, what is going to be applicable. That's where we really have to get creative and really have conversations with the family court bar. That's what I would like to see the legislature do, is bring in people that are doing this every day. Ask us what are the strategies that we're seeing.
Should you testify before a legislative panel?
I would love to. And really, as a community and jurists, let's come together and try to solve this problem. No one's in favor of domestic violence. I think we can all agree it's a bipartisan issue, and it's one that's going to continue to get worse until there's something done to stop it. And I think we're placed in a unique situation with the horrific events of Micah Miller. Let's not let it be for naught.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit about the legislative push. There have been bills introduced. In fact, one of them introduced by a leader of the Freedom Caucus, the more conservative wing of the party. There was another bill introduced by Senator Katrina Shealy, who some would argue more in the moderate Republican camp. Katrina Shealy will not be coming back to Columbia. She lost her primary election. But this issue shaping up legislatively, Lauren, you talked about trying to find that balance. Let me throw a situation at you. We talked about a woman fearing for her life, fleeing with her children, having her credit cards turned off. Obviously, that's one scenario, but could not a inartfully drawn statute apply the same standard to a stay-at-home dad who wife is working, she decides, I'm done with this bum, he never leaves the couch, the guy starts billing everything, she cuts his credit card off, couldn't she be guilty of the same crime if we don't draw this law the right way?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And that's what we don't want to clog the court system anymore. So we need to have like defined things. So I think what's been suggested is like you have to be, in a relationship with the person and living with them. That's the domestic part, okay? Whether you have children or you have to share a home, excuse me. But yeah, anything like that. I mean, we see all the time where there's women that are, I think there was a huge case like in the UK recently where the woman was abusing her husband and he finally was able to subpoena the footage from the Ring cameras to actually get it on tape because no one was believing him. But yeah, absolutely. So if we're just doing on financial basis, the prongs have to kind of be more than one, I think. I don't think we can and these are criminal. Let's be really clear here too. This is a criminal law, meaning like you violate it, you will go to jail. And so when we're taking away someone's liberty, we have to be really clear on like what it is that you did that is against this law. So I think the factors being like, it can't just be financial abuse. It has to be that with another prong, like maybe stalking or family isolation. But again, like we're now making it even more harder on the victim to prove all of those things. What if you are that person and like Micah did, she kept a journal, she obviously told her family about all of these things to create more witnesses. She took videos, she photographed her, injuries and things text messages and things he was sending her.
She did everything we asked women to do.
Everything we asked for them to do. And I have to think that day when she went to the store, the only thing that could have been going through her head is, I'll never get away. Doesn't matter what I do, he's always there, he always finds me, I will never be free from this man. And for that to be the only two options, I think it's just unacceptable. But it's not going to be a clean, simple fix. It's going to have to be getting our hands dirty, and the judiciary is going to have to spend some time really carving out what facts are going to arise to a scenario that we are going to apply this law to. Because not every judge is going to see every situation as dire or urgent as maybe another justice would. So in the inequity that is family court, which is supposed to be a court of equity, how do we apply this overall and provide the same protections with people without allowing abusers to use that law to further their abuse?
Let me ask you a front-end question about this. And obviously the last thing either party of a couple madly in love decide they're going to get married, the last thing either of them wants to hear is, hey, by the way, before we do this, let's go talk to the lawyers. That doesn't exactly connote an atmosphere of trust or romance. Exactly. But on the front end of this, are there things that can be done prior to entering into a marriage or a civil union or a domestic partnership? Are there things that can be done on the front end to, at least on the civil side, prevent some of these abusive behaviors short of a criminal statute? What would you advise, for example, someone getting ready to get married?
Well, I actually have a friend that's getting married this weekend. I advised her to get a prenuptial agreement. However, prenups can't address a lot of this stuff. And even if I can set up the best situation for you and put all of your assets into a protected situation and make it non-marital, if someone is truly coercively controlling you, they can convince you to go take that protected asset and commingle it, and now it's marital. So yes, I can do that, but no, not really. I mean, I'll be honest, I have a lot of girlfriends who, over the years, they got married and divorced, and two of them actually that stands out in my brain, like it was like a switch flipped, like the night of the marriage, like after it was done, the first night of married couple, their husband just became a different person. So yeah, obviously date someone for a long time, try to find out as much as you can about them, but I mean, I would be giving everyone a disservice of advice if I was saying there's some way to spot an abuser or some smell that you can train yourself to look for. I think it's red flags, yes, but some people's red flags aren't as bright as others. I think it's really surrounding yourself with a good core group of friends and family and then listening to their opinions. Don't brush those off, because those are the people that know you, know your personality, and know what lifestyles are going to work with you and what aren't. And then also don't ever, don't be that girl that gets a girlfriend or boyfriend and dumps all your friends, because you're going to need them. That's part of the coercive control, is making you depend only on that person. So yeah, I would definitely date. I would definitely get a prenup, but there's no universal, foolproof way.
Lauren, as this process moves forward and as the legislature begins to grapple with these issues, what do you think is the one thing that women who are either in this situation, let's say that you've got a woman who is starting to see those signs that you mentioned, starting to see that switch flipping. What do you tell them to do if they have that feeling in their gut? Wait a minute, this guy I married, what's your advice for them?
I think the first thing is it's easier to make any kind of decision when you feel financially stable. So start looking at, and I mean, I've told women, like, when you go grocery shopping, you put your debit card in, you can get $50 back cash, and it looks like you spent $50 more at the grocery store that your husband's not knowing about. Put that cash in your pocket, create a little honey jar, and then also that notebook, because when you come to me and you want advice and you're trying to convey 10, 15, 20 years of a story in 30 minutes, and I need to hear the most important parts of it, giving me this diary to just, I can skim it and be like, wow, this is this guy's pattern, or this woman's pattern, this is how they operate, and most people operate in a cyclical cycle, okay, like abusers do. They abuse, and then they're angry and mad, and then they come back with a nice gift, I'm so sorry, please forgive me.
Love bombing.
Love bombing, and then it continues and it continues and it continues. So I think that's going to be the first thing, is if you can have some sort of financial stability, everything else is going to be easier. Because if you don't have that, that dictates everything. You can't go here because you can't afford it. You can't leave the house because you can't afford it. Your kids can't eat, so even just those little bits of money that you can hoard away. Don't talk to your spouse about anything. Tell your best friends everything. All these datelines that we see, it's always the best friend that's coming to the police and they're like, no,
Yeah.
she didn't take a bath.
Best friend knows what's up.
The best friend knows what's going on. So tell your closest people, keep a journal, and then try to squirrel away as much money as you can and come up with a plan, because it really is, it's a war. It's an ending of a family. It's a division of a company, a marital asset, a company, and you're going to need help and support financially, emotionally, and really in every type of way to leave an abusive situation. And it's a slow burn. So don't, get your plan together, and then don't share your plan with anyone.
Well, the good news, the fact we're having this conversation, the fact that lawmakers in Columbia are having this conversation, I think Micah Miller's death certainly has pushed this to the forefront. Lauren, this is going to be a big issue when lawmakers come back to Columbia, South Carolina in January. It's going to be a big issue probably in pre-filing this December. As these bills drop, as lawmakers start debating this, would you be willing to come back?
Absolutely.
Go through these proposals, see which ones work, see which ones might have some pitfalls?
Absolutely.
You'd be willing to walk?
Absolutely.
That'd be wonderful. Lauren, can't thank you enough. But hey, before we go, I got to ask you about this. I can't let you go without asking you your take on this just insanity that is unfolding with our national political scene. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think Joe Biden stays on the ticket? Do you think he gets booted? How does this whole process work? Is there legal things that we should be mindful of as we watch this unfold?
Well, yeah, this, first of all, talking about all the things we've talked about today, this is another novel issue that our country hasn't faced in its few hundred years of inception. So yeah, there's a lot of legalities here. The Electoral College is obviously what elects our presidents, and whoever is the first to get to the 270 number is the one that wins the election. However, the process of each party, the Republicans and the Democrats, of actually nominating their candidates, each party has their own set of rules, okay? And every state has their own set of rules that govern their state electors. In most states, every state is different, but in most states, if you're trying to remove a candidate that was already on the ballot at the time of the primary election, there's stipulations in what circumstances that you can do that in. Some states require the candidate to die. Other states...
We could get there.
We could get there. God willing, no one die. We could get there. He could either die, he could be medically unfit, but overall, he would have to withdraw himself. There has no...
Voluntary.
Correct. It would have to be voluntary, or a medical diagnosis that would prevent him from being suitable to fulfill the nomination. So what we're going to see in the next, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, I think there's been a lot of rumblings, a lot of senior party members in the Democratic Party, like Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, have all been having private conversations with President Biden
President Obama as well.
And former President Obama. I just read that one last night. So what they're going to be deciding from a procedural standpoint, obviously the Republicans are wrapping up their convention. They did so last night, and Donald Trump formally accepted the nomination. So when the Democrats do this in August, there's going to be several options, okay? One of which is what you call an open convention. That essentially means that there is no presumed favorite candidate, no backroom doors where they've said this is going to be our guy or gal, that everyone just writes in who they want to be the nominee. That is, like, my husband and I were talking about it, and I think he used the analogy of like WWE. It is going to be nuts if that is the way the Democratic Party chooses to hold their convention. The other option, which is more likely, is that they are talking as we speak about what options they have. It's not necessary that Ms. Harris, the current Vice President Kamala Harris, be on the ticket, even though she's been on it so far in the primaries. They can ball up the whole ticket, toss it away. They could move her up. They could keep her at the VP slot and put another person in. There's a lot of scenarios here. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, just like the total 270 number for the Electoral College, the Democratic Convention also has a required number of electors to vote for a candidate for them to secure the nomination. So, you know, we could be seeing a lot of splinter candidates coming up with the decision Democrats made in 2020 to rerun Joe Biden. They left a lot on the table in time, because, you know, it takes a long time for the American people to get to know a presidential candidate. Usually we are bombarded for months on end with political ads and, you know, family stories and the October surprise that undoubtedly comes. So whoever it is, absent being Kamala Harris, who we do know, enough about because she ran on the previous ticket, this person is at a serious disadvantage already. We're coming off of the first attempted assassination attempt since Ronald Reagan. Our country is absolutely in a heightened state. I feel like everyone feels it, regardless of what side of the aisle you fall on. So I think who the Democrats choose is going to be just as important for Republicans as it is for Democrats, and to see how they structure it, whether they can actually come together. The Republican Party is doing an amazing job of uniting right now. It feels very similar to after 9/11 when, people really came together. I feel like the unfortunate attempt on President Trump's life has had that ripple effect where, they're coming closer together, whereas Democrats are kind of a hot mess right now. So for them to be able to get their ducks in a row, agree on who the new candidate would be, and then have enough time to push that candidate and create a rapport with the American public and get to 270, I don't know.
It's a tall order.
It's a tall order, but it's going to be the most, daytime soap Emmy award-winning show.
Usually this is pre-scripted dinner theater. Now we've got some real drama.
Exactly. We might be on the mid-season or mid-series premiere of America. But it's going to be interesting, especially for political scholars, to see how this all plays out and who's chosen and who's quote-unquote anointed as the next leader of the Democratic Party.
Should be like a very high-stakes reality show, like voting these people on.
Like Survivor or Big Brother.
Exactly. You got any predictions for which way they go?
I don't know. I've been analyzing with a lot of people. There's a lot of, anytime anyone is running for presidential office, there's a huge undetermined factor, and that's the ego. Your personal ego, your desire for power. Kamala Harris, if I was her, I wouldn't love not being automatically the next nominee.
Very dangerous.
It's
to skip over her.
It's dangerous to step over her. It's dangerous to demote her. And, if there's an argument that she's not polling well and therefore she's not a viable candidate, if the goal is to win the election, so she should maybe, take a step back for the greater good of the party. Ego plays a role in those things, and I don't know, there's a lot of egos. There's going to be a lot of people that are on the phone probably right now having in-depth conversations with their families and their friends and, what would life look like if I took this on? Like I said, you just had a presidential assassination attempt. So this is not an easy job. whoever wins this election is not taking over at a time of peace or Americans feeling together. If anything, we're more divided now than we ever have been. So it's a tall order for whoever gets the nomination, but also whoever wins the presidency, because the hope is that whoever it is can build these bridges back and we can become a more unified nation.
I got to hand it to you, just like the Murdaugh saga. We leave and don't know where you are on these issues, but once
I'll
again,
never tell.
amazing insight though, and the way that you were able to do it and so impartially take on these issues that really arouse passion and just be so analytical and insightful about it. It's really great to hear it. Thank you, Lauren, for
Thanks, Will.
sharing that.
Happy to.
So we've all heard the expression slow news day. We've all heard the expression that some years no news is made, but some weeks, years worth of news is made. Dylan Nolan, it's safe to say we've had a few years worth of news here in the past couple weeks in the 2024 presidential election.
I mean, just this week we've had the front runner, well, now the Republican nominee shot. We've had him named as vice president. We've had one of the biggest cases being brought against him in federal court thrown out. It's been a heck of a news week.
And that's just on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, we've got a soft coup gaining momentum. In fact, it was reported widely this week that Joe Biden was going to drop out of the race this weekend. That is still the contention of many mainstream media outlets. Biden and his team pushing back aggressively against that, saying he's not releasing reports from his doctor attesting to his health. By the way, he has COVID. We found that out this week. Tons of news this week. Let's assess it. We just talked a minute ago with Lauren Taylor about the potential process that could play out at the Democratic convention next month, with Biden potentially being replaced on the ticket by either Kamala Harris or some other Democrat. But let's just look at the state of the race right now, understanding that we are in unprecedented times where the situation is changing minute by minute. Where does the race stand right now? Who's in the lead? If the election's held tomorrow, who wins and by what margin?
I mean, all the polling says that Donald Trump's in the lead. It has said that for a while. That's why the attack on Biden came at this debate. That's why they wanted to have their debate early so that they could do exactly what is happening right now. I told you months ago that Biden was on the outs. And it's very interesting because by the time folks are watching this, probably Saturday, although I do intend on releasing this episode earlier than usual just because news has been moving so fast this week. I just want to keep it, the minute I'm done with this episode, it's going up.
Load it up.
So that it could be relevant for as long as possible. But I do think if the election's held today, Donald Trump wins. I think Kamala Harris is not much better positioned, which is why you see right now, as we're recording this, the scheming is there to basically screw Kamala by keeping Joe Biden in office until the end of his term so she never assumes the presidency, by having an open convention so that they can run a stronger candidate.
And who is that stronger candidate?
You know, it's interesting. It will be very fun to see who the Democrats go with. I think it's going to be, if they don't let their party elite pick, I think it will be the strongest Democrat candidate we've seen in a long time. In 2016, they rigged their own process, threw out Bernie Sanders, who was the strongest candidate, who I believe had a very good chance of beating Donald Trump so that they could run party favorite Hillary Clinton, who was, of course, extremely unlikable, and ended up losing to Trump.
Before you go on, Dylan's talking about this 2016 Democratic presidential primary being rigged. Dylan is not just saying this in a vacuum, folks. The former chairwoman of the party admitted on the record it was rigged. So you're not pulling, this is not right-wing.
No, this isn't like conspiracy theory. This is accepted fact. And it's just the thing within the Democrat Party is that the party elite have a very heavy hand in picking who ascends to the nomination. And I think that if they had all of their top stable there on primetime TV for half a week at the Democrat National Convention, while the party elite, of course, are going to have a huge hand in shaping the media narrative, they won't be able to completely control it, control the process like they usually do in their primaries. And I think that will actually end up being a really good thing for their prospects of success in the election, because it will be a more meritocratic process than their usual elite selection.
Kind of ironic that the party which insists that democracy itself is at stake in this election, trying behind the scenes to rig yet another one of their presidential nominating processes, Dylan. A little
I'm
bit
sure
of
that old
hypocrisy.
Dean Phillips, which if folks don't remember, Dean Phillips actually ran against Joe Biden as a Democrat. You probably wouldn't know this because his own party, did everything they could to pour cold water on his candidacy, because at that time, you weren't allowed to question Joe Biden yet. But he said what everybody is saying now, which is Joe Biden will have a very hard time in November winning this election, and clearly Dean had some reason to say that.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier these battleground state polls that Trump has been leading in for some time. It is very important to point that out. Trump's lead in this race is not a new phenomenon, certainly at least as it relates to the 7 battleground states that folks are really watching very closely: Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia. Some say North Carolina is a battleground state. I'm not so sure about that one. But with the exception of North Carolina, all of those are states that Joe Biden won in 2020, some of them by incredibly thin margins. But we're talking 70, nearly 80 electoral votes amongst these states. That is where this race is going to be decided. Trump's been leading in these states for some time. When you throw RFK Jr. in the race, when you throw Cornel West, Green Party, Libertarian Party on the ballot, all of a sudden his lead in most of those states, I think Pennsylvania may be the lone exception, but in most of those states his lead expands with additional candidates on the ballot. Is that ultimately what is behind the push to oust Joe Biden, those swing state numbers, Dylan?
That, and that was what was behind the push to oust Donald Trump last weekend.
Dylan, obviously unprecedented times. We've covered political races in the past, but we never covered anything like this. I don't think anybody in this country has seen anything like this. And obviously last Saturday in Butler, Pennsylvania, the first time in more than 4 decades that the Secret Service had one of its protectees hit by a bullet. Last time it happened was in the first term of Ronald Reagan, nearly killed Reagan. Trump has been vocally supportive of the Secret Service. He thanked them in the aftermath, but since then, we've seen some pretty galling evidence of clear security lapses, major security lapses, to the point that you almost have to question, was it just lapses or was there something more sinister afoot? What are your thoughts on that? Put your tinfoil hat on for a minute.
It never comes off, and there were 20 minutes between security identifying the shooter on the roof and them and the shots going off. And for folks who don't know, he was on stage for about 5 minutes prior to the shots going off. So for 15 minutes before he went on stage, his security had identified that there was a guy on the roof, and nobody prevented him from going on stage. Nobody pulled him off stage. They saw him there with a rangefinder, which, if folks don't know, this is a device you use for shooting, which uses a laser to tell you how far away your target is so that you can make sure that you adjust the elevation properly. They saw somebody with a rangefinder scouting out the area an hour before the event, and they still let him on stage. This is not some, one stupid error, oh my God, he got past the magnetometer. This is a series, this is 4 or 5 unforgivably stupid errors, which, as you say, it makes you wonder how it's possible that that could be incompetence.
Well, we're going to have a number of different inquiries into that. Obviously, House Republicans not content to let the Secret Service investigate itself here, not content to let them write the book on this narrative. They've called for hearings, which will actually, later this month, the first hearings in D.C. regarding the Secret Service's failure will be held. I wanted to ask you one thing. There's been a meme that's been going around. You sort of feel sorry for this woman, but on the same token, you also want to point out that, hey, this is an important job that these folks failed to do. The woman attempting to holster her weapon doesn't seem to be in peak physical form, perhaps. Again, not going to cast aspersions, but this is a job that requires perfection. I think Mark Powell, one of our columnists, wrote it perfectly. There are a lot of jobs you can do 99% of the time, and that's great. You get a 99 on a test in school, that's great. But if you're the Secret Service, 99 out of 100 ain't going to cut it. You got to be perfect. And to see the Secret Service respond to some legitimate criticism about the agents who are protecting Trump, to see them respond the way that they have, very defensive, very politically correct, you're attacking diversity. No, we're attacking the failure of this agency to do its job. What did you think when you saw this woman fumbling to put her gun in the holster and the Secret Service's response to all of it?
I'm very, obviously folks go down that narrative path and they have every right to do that. Obviously these people look like fools, because how the heck is a 5'3", 200-pound woman supposed to protect a 6'5" man? Like, it's just impossible. There's going to be so much of his body which it can't be shielded by hers. But the real questions to me have little to do with DEI and with women being in jobs where they have no business, protecting people. And
well, those women anyway. There's some women that are pretty.
There's some Amazons out there, but they're few and far between.
Get Catherine Dennis in front of them, right?
You said that, not me. But what really, a woman, a child, somebody with one arm could pick up a radio and say, "Get the protectee off the stage." It has nothing to do with being a woman. It's a lot more to do with what the heck was going on with the decision making. Who gave the order to send him on stage once they knew about this? Whoever gave that order has a lot of questions to answer, whether they're a man or a woman.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. How much obviously we're spending a good bit of time discussing it here, but how much do you think that the narrative of what happened that day in Pennsylvania, in that farm in Butler, Pennsylvania, how much do you think that narrative factors into the election, and who does it benefit? Because a lot of folks would say, oh, it's just the right wing being kooky, but then you got folks on the left who are saying, well, they
I know.
staged it.
I mean, I was asked by somebody last night who has an advanced degree, who graduated from graduate school, do you think it really happened? This person has an advanced professional degree.
Yeah.
And they asked me, do you think it really happened?
Wow.
So yes, this narrative is pervasive.
Yeah.
And it's the same, like, you know how COVID brought out a lot of people with some interesting theories? This is showing that people on the left and people on the right, there are plenty of morons in each camp.
Well, there are. I had a post on Facebook earlier today talking about some of the folks who believe that the shot on Trump's ear was somehow a biblical blood christening or some craziness, man. It's everywhere you look, the craziness.
Well, whether you believe it's a blood christening or not, I mean, even if you're not religious, you might be inclined to believe that there was some sort of act of God there that spared him, because he was within a half an inch of death.
Yeah. Trump certainly said as much in his response in the immediate aftermath of the shooting and in his acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention. Dylan, let me ask you this. As we look at this race unfolding over the next 107 days, I believe we've got until the election as we film this today, as you watch this on Saturday, the 20th of July, 107 days until November 5th. What do Democrats have to do to eat into that lead? And again, I say Democrats, notice I'm not saying Biden, we'll see. But what is their challenge as far as bridging the gap in those critical swing states? What do they have to do?
I think they're going to run the 2020 playbook hard again. I think they're going to show up to people's houses with ballots. I think they're going to stuff drop-in boxes like they did last time. There's been nothing to prevent them from doing that again. I think Republicans, even if they're up in polls overwhelmingly, need to be prepared to have similar levels of operations on the ground, similarly effective operations on the ground. In 2020 and 2022, those were both things that the Republican Party completely dropped the ball on. Even though the Democrats are completely down and out right now, it does not mean that they don't have operatives on the ground that are going to be working on getting every single person on the voter roll, making sure that they have a ballot that is a Democrat ballot that ends up being counted in this election. So it doesn't even matter who the candidate is. I mean, they won in 2020 weekend at Bernie's, and they almost did it again. Heck, he could not drop out this weekend, and they could run him again.
Yeah, and win. You never know.
And win again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what the Republicans are up against, but I think the Democrats' strongest suit has nothing to do with their candidates and has everything to do with their ground operations.
When we talk about that, and one of the smartest guys in the national conversation as it relates to predicting elections, calling elections, Robert Cahaly, he addressed a crowd at the RNC this past week and urged caution, said don't get overconfident. This is still a long way to the election. A lot of things can happen. Cahaly, one of the smartest guys in the room. So obviously when
I heard a lot of folks in RNC speaking about, who's going to get what cabinet position, as if a Trump presidency is assured.
Well, and it's almost like Republicans are singing that Steve Winwood song, Back in the High Life, a little too early, Dylan. They might want to check themselves. South Carolina connections. I want to ask you about this because we're going to pivot a little bit and talk about Trump's selection for Vice President J.D. Vance. He was praised effusively by South Carolina senior U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, but the moment Graham comes out publicly in support of J.D. Vance, he gets smacked down very quickly by Tucker Carlson, who said, just before this guy was announced, you were privately dogging him out because J.D. Vance, like Trump, more of an interventionist on foreign policy.
Non-interventionist.
Yeah, forgive me, thank you. Non-interventionist. Lindsey Graham, on the other hand, wants to invade literally everybody. What do you think about the selection of J.D. Vance? How do you think that's going to play with America's foreign policy debate? And do you think Trump did well picking a guy who hopefully can shore him up in the Rust Belt states?
Yeah, I think that J.D. Vance was picked because he's a MAGA heir. He's not picked to try to pick up votes like Mike Pence was. He was selected to try to get that evangelical vote. I think Trump is already pretty strong in Vance territory. That being said, he's the youngest vice presidential nominee in a very long time. He is the heir apparent to MAGA at this point. And as you say, I would say his foreign policy is less non-interventionist and more realist. And I say that because he's a hawk when it comes to Iran. He is certainly not somebody who's opposed to all military interventions. But he does feel that Lindsey Graham's baby, which is the war in Ukraine, Lindsey Graham's been spoiling for the war in Ukraine for more than a decade. You know, the day that Russia crossed that border, I'm sure that he was toasting and drinking champagne. And if you look, J.D. Vance in the Senate said he sees no value to that war. So obviously, Lindsey Graham was advocating hard against him behind the scenes. And Tucker, you know, finds it a bit ironic that he goes out and then is immediately kissing ass. It's the most Lindsey Graham move ever. I mean, he is the quintessential Washington, D.C. snake.
Well, he is, and it's good that we're in an era now where those snakes are getting called out a little bit. We've got a platform now, X, which is opening up a lot of that debate. And we were talking about this earlier, the impact of X and social media being a little bit less restrained than it was the last election cycle. Last election cycle, there was a clampdown on speech.
You were banned.
Yeah, we got banned, we got blocked, we got everything we said, got some community note attached to it. Pay no attention to the previous message. What's the impact of a liberated social media on 2024?
We're going to see it with this assassination attempt because the media is, you know, they're going to try to write whatever story the intelligence community tries to tell them to write. And the people online, I think, are going to be able to put together pieces of information that, had the internet existed when JFK's head got blown off his shoulders, would have not taken 50, 60 years to come out. We're going to see this story get put together in a way we've never seen a story like this come together, because there's so many smart people who are interested, who have access to troves of information, because so many people were there with cell phones. We're going to see information come out about this, about this kid's connection to BlackRock, about potential second shooter location. We're going to see all sorts of things which you will never see in the pre-internet era discussed in a serious way, are going to be discussed by millions of people. We're going to talk about the absurd shorts of Donald Trump's stock, which, if folks don't know, that means bets the stock price is going to go down the day before the shooting. Who owned the company that made those shorts? Why did they make those shorts? These are all things that, you know, you even talk about Congress getting into it. Okay, well, let's look at JFK, the Warren Commission, the Warren Report. It was absolute BS. We know that now.
Fiction. Absolutely.
Even if Congress lies to us like they did back then, the internet, I think, is going to help us get to the bottom of this, and that's going to be completely a game-changing thing in this election cycle and in history moving forward.
Absolutely. And again, the mainstream media that has for so long driven these narratives in the aftermath of events like this, they don't have a monopoly on it anymore. And credit to Elon Musk and work he's done at X to advance that free flow of information. And again, not all of it's right. We're not sitting here endorsing every crazy tweet.
But you saw Joy Reid, MSNBC, a cable television host, was saying like days after the shooting that it was fake.
Yeah.
So it's not only loons on the internet who are saying made up stuff. I mean, there are people who are talking from these verified, reputable information sources who are also talking out of their butts.
Well, and that's the beauty, though, as we go back to the defining principle of this media outlet. We've said it once, we'll say it a million times. The marketplace of ideas. It is the power of a thought to get itself accepted in that marketplace. And we are seeing, for the first time, I think, in a long time in this country, a robust marketplace. And yeah, there's some craziness out there, as we mentioned, on both sides. No side has a monopoly on the truth dealing, no side has a monopoly on insanity. But the fact that we're able to have these open discussions now without government censors, without powerful corporate censors, it's a huge deal because, again, it frees that information up, and hopefully at the end of the day, the truth will shake out.
Right. Yeah, we don't know which of these, tinfoil hat conspiracies right now will prove true 5 years from now, but it's a good thing that we're parsing through this information and we're not waiting on the Secret Service to tell us what happened.
Absolutely. Which reminds us, here at FITSNews, obviously we are not shy to say what we think, not shy about sharing what we believe, but the key principle of this media outlet is that open microphone, that open marketplace. So anybody with an intelligent perspective on any of the events that we discuss here, whether it's true crime, whether it's politics, whether it's crime in courts in South Carolina and beyond, our microphone is your microphone. And we are always welcome to share not only divergent takes, but takes that are critical of us, critical of what we put out there. Again, that's the marketplace. That's the way it's supposed to work. Dylan, you've been doing an amazing job covering this election, calling things from the beginning. I want to put you on the spot one more time. As we air this, obviously a lot of uncertainty surrounding Joe Biden, but I'm going to point you to next month, to August. Who will the Democratic nominee be as the Democrats depart Chicago in their convention? Who will it be? You're on the spot.
I've always liked Gavin. It's the hair.
That would be a heck of a hair battle. Gavin v. Trump. All right. Dylan goes with Gavin Newsom. I'm going to say Kamala. I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. I think you skip over at your own peril if you're Democrats. And I think that here's the thing, Dylan. If you're a black female voter who doesn't really pay much attention to politics, who doesn't sample the word salad that Kamala Harris throws out there, again, arguably she's cognitively challenged as Biden.
I mean, she's the candidate that could be unburdened by what has been.
Exactly, yes. But even those who don't know much about Kamala Harris, I would argue just the fact of skipping over a female black candidate, I don't know how the Democrats...
Well, she's only half black, so it's half a skip.
Well, but the Democrats, identity politic is sacred to them.
And it's funny, you would think that nominating Kamala, a candidate who is so unlikable that they haven't ditched Joe yet, would teach them that maybe you shouldn't make hiring decisions based off of race and sex and just do it based off of merit, but here we are.
Here we are. Well, Dylan's going to guess Gavin Newsom. I'm going to guess Kamala. We will see. Democratic convention coming up next month. Keep it tuned to FITSNews for the very latest on the 2024 presidential election. By the way, we're the first outlet in South Carolina to have the story up about Trump's assassination attempt. We had in-depth coverage up and running before the rest of the mainstream press here in the Palmetto State even knew what had happened. So keep it tuned to FITSNews, not only for the very latest developments, but analysis and assessment of what it means and what it'll mean for you and your family and your bottom line in the coming years. Thank you. All right, folks, that's a wrap for a special breaking news edition of Your Week in Review. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I especially want to thank James Schiller Real Estate. They're the folks that have listed this gorgeous property here at the Bristol, one of the most beautiful condo buildings here in downtown Charleston on the banks of the Ashley River. Absolutely gorgeous property. It's only been on the market for 2 days. Heck, we might pick it up. Come down here more often. But anyway, check it out, James Schiller Real Estate. They've got you covered if you want to check out this gorgeous venue. Want to thank Dylan Nolan for his work, both analyzing the political developments, unprecedented developments over the last week, and his work behind the camera. And always Lauren Taylor for lending us her legal expertise, not only in the presidential race, but a number of other of these core stories that we've been covering for so many weeks and months now. Can't thank her enough for lending her expertise. Quick note, programming note, if you noticed FITSNews this past week, you might have seen something a little different there at the top of the page. We got a new breaking news functionality. We just launched it this week, very excited. It'll help us cover more stories and hopefully, again, drive more accountability, not only here in the Palmetto State, but beyond. And again, thank you. If you're not already a subscriber to FITSNews, think about it. It's only $8 a month. Helps empower everything we do, breaking, analytical, and here on the Week in Review. We will catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in.